Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Blue Star Family's Money Mondays webinars. This is a program dedicated to conversations about finances in the military. I am your usual host, Lydia Whitty, the JP Morgan Chase Financial Wellness Deploy Fellow with Blue Star Family's Campaign for Inclusion initiative. This initiative is aimed at raising awareness of the experiences of military families of color and increasing diversity in leadership within the military and veteran serving organizations. About myself, I am an Army veteran spouse and an ardent advocate for foreign born military spouses and their family. As you may know, the results from Blue Star Family's groundbreaking Military Families Lifestyle Survey, which we call MFLS, were released a few weeks ago. And so today, we want to delve a little deep into the findings that touch on financial security. This could include housing, food insecurity, and other things. I'm also joined by amazing panelists that are doing a lot of work in our communities. I cannot wait for them to tell you about everything they do. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my panelists. First, we have Dr. Jessica Strong. Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica. Welcome. As a senior director of applied research at Blue Star Families, Jessica leads a team of research and policy professionals developing impactful research to inform and drive policy change to address military lifestyle challenges and support military and veteran families. Jessica joined Blue Star Families as a volunteer chapter director in 2017 after a military relocation shifted her career trajectory away from academia, but soon transitioned into the research team. She leads Blue Star Families research, policy, and program evaluation efforts. Prior to joining Blue Star Families, she accumulated more than 10 years of experience in nonprofit program administration, research with veterans at the VA, university teaching and research, and mental health crisis intervention with youths. She has previously researched military families as an assistant professor of social work at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, publishing her research in the professional literature and teaching military affiliated students at Camp Lejeune. She holds a master's degree in social work from Fayetteville State University and a PhD in social work from Rutgers University. Jessica is an active duty Army spouse with 3 children, currently stationed at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I don't think I ever get this straight, but I hope I did. Did I, Jessica?
Close, close. I had the same struggle when I first saw it. It's Huachuca.
Huachuca.
Mhm.
Oh,
Is that right?
thank you. Thank you. Secondly, we have Josh Protes. Josh is the Vice President of Public Policy and heads the Washington, D.C. office for Mason. In this role, which he assumed in 2012, he coordinates and implements Mason's advocacy agenda, including efforts to strengthen and improve the federal nutrition safety net, with particular emphasis on policy solutions to address the food security needs of overlooked populations. George has extensive experience working at both the local community and national level, including as director of the Jewish Community Relations Council at the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona and as a vice president and Washington director for the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. He previously served as a member of the board of directors for the Coalition on Human Needs and was recently appointed to serve on the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Advisory Committee on Homeless Veterans. Josh earned his MA in Western American History and Public History from Arizona State University and his BA in American Studies and French Literature from Wesleyan University. I hope I pronounced that well, Josh.
You did great.
I try, thank you. Last but certainly not least is Marla Bautista. Marla is a food insecurity and welcome programs deploy fellow at Blue Star Families. Marla works to improve food security for military families and increase solution driven advocacy within the entire military community. Through her approach, she created 3 pillars to address food insecurity, and her goal is to educate, advocate, and provide for military families facing food insecurity. Thank you all for joining me today. We will dive right in, see what we are here to talk about. I'll begin with you, Jess, but before that, I just want to ask before I ask you any questions, I'd like to thank you and your team, the research team, for such an amazing work that you guys do all year round with this survey and others like the Pulse Check. So thank you so much. For our audience who might not be familiar with this survey, could you please share a little bit about it? What is it? What is MFLS? When did it start? Why? How many responses do we get? What are the demographics? Some of the key, I mean, no, don't delve into key findings right now, but tell us a little bit about MFLS.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to come here and talk a little bit about it. As you well know, as part of our research team, I could talk about MFLS and our research projects all day long. So I'll keep it short and simple in talking about the MFLS, the Military Family Lifestyle Survey. This was what Blue Star Families sort of was founded around. Or at least it was one of the first things that the founders did when they created Blue Star Families back in 2009. So in 2009, a small group of military spouses got together and said, you know, we love being part of the national security landscape. We love military service, but there are some things that we could make a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be as hard as it is. So how can we help make this lifestyle a little bit easier, especially now that we are an all volunteer force and require people to volunteer to serve in the military? How do we make this continue to be a sustainable and attractive lifestyle to maintain national security? So one of the first things they did was put together the Military Family Lifestyle Survey to understand and elevate the voices of military families who are living this life. So it started in 2009 with about 2,700 respondents, and we have been doing it annually since then. We just released, as you alluded to, the 2022 Military Family Lifestyle Survey. It was fielded last year in May to July, but we just published it last month. We had over 9,000 respondents, 9,363 respondents, which includes both active duty service members and their spouses, and National Guard and Reserve and veteran, and their spouses as well. So it really captures the whole life cycle of military life, from people who have just joined the military, have just entered military life, to all the way through military service, through the transition out into veteran life as well. So it started back in 2009, about 9,000 and some respondents. It includes people from all over, everybody who is touched by military service. And we'll get into the key findings in a little bit, but it is very comprehensive, meaning it covers a lot of different topics. Spouse employment, food insecurity, financial well-being are some of the topics that we typically cover every year, or at least financial security are topics that we cover every year, but the topics change as we try to be responsive to emerging issues that are coming out, as well as paying attention to perennial issues like spouse employment that contribute to some of the lifestyle concerns. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. That's great. Now let's go right in. From the most current one, the 2022 survey, we learned that the top contributors to financial stress for military families are housing, relocation costs, and unemployment. Tell us what you found with these three.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So every year we look at the top issues. We ask families, what are the top issues that you're concerned about, and select 5. And then we rank those up based on the proportion of respondents who have selected that as one of their top 5 issues. So the top 5 issues have obviously shifted over the years as new things have popped up and new challenges have emerged. We see new things arising to those top 5. Some of the ones that are almost always in the top 5 are spouse employment and time away from family. We know those are 2 major concerns for military life, spouse employment in particular. Spouse employment has been a top issue since 2009 when we founded it, and it has been number 1 of the top issues for the past 5 or 6 years, something like that. One thing that we saw this year that was a little bit of a departure is that it was clear that military families really have financial security top of mind, because 3, maybe 4 of the top 5 issues were all focused around financial security. So we had spouse employment as number 1, time away from the service member, time away from family as part of military service is number 2. And then the bottom 3 were relocation and PCS issues, military pay, and BAH and housing, out-of-pocket housing costs. So those are making it very clear that at least in 2022, during that May to July time period, people were really thinking about the costs of military service, including every time you relocate, what kind of out-of-pocket costs you were going to have, as well as costs related to housing and financial security in general, and how spouse employment or lack thereof can contribute to that insecurity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jess. Now I'll move to you. Josh. The same report from 2020 says 16% of active duty family respondents reported experiencing low or very low food insecurity levels. When broken down, 24% are enlisted families and 4% officer families.
Mhm.
Interestingly, among the top 5 issues for military families is spouse employment. 1 and 3, I'd have to reframe that. Interestingly, among the top 5 issues for military families is spouse unemployment. That's the top one. And the third is military pay. Do you think this could be the reasons families are insecure? I know you're a subject matter on this, food insecurity. Talk to us, Josh.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And thanks to Blue Star Families for the great research and including questions about food insecurity as part of the survey. You know, these issues don't live in a silo, right? So for a family that may be struggling with food insecurity, they may be making difficult choices about spending limited dollars to purchase food or to pay for medicine or to pay for utilities. So economic hardship touches a lot of different issues. And we know that one of the big drivers is that military families just don't have adequate resources, or many military families don't have adequate resources. And as you mentioned, the spousal unemployment is a huge driver of this. For a long time, the Department of Defense kind of pushed back on the idea that there was even food insecurity at all among military families. And they would point to the compensation and benefits that were paid and issued to junior enlisted service members, and to say, well, if you compare that to people who do comparable work in the private sector, it's more than fair, it's more than adequate. And the problem is that for that household in the civilian population, they're more commonly getting by with a dual earner household. And for military families, it's more common compared to their civilian counterparts that there is a spouse that doesn't work or is underemployed. And so while you look at the compensation at the individual level, food insecurity and economic hardship are really felt at the household level. And I think that disconnect is something that we're getting a better understanding of, and recognizing why there are some particular policy needs that need to be adjusted to make sure that we're adequately supporting our military families. Another piece to this as well is the lack of access and lack of affordability of childcare. And so that ties in directly around spousal employment, because it may not pay for a military spouse to work outside of the home if they don't even cover enough to pay for childcare. And then I think with the housing issues as well, there's unfortunately a lot of out-of-pocket costs that military families have to face, both from PCS moves, but also from substandard housing that is too common. So these issues really tie in together. And I just want to note, we're talking about the statistics that were found from the survey, and there's been recent reporting from the Department of Defense. It's just unconscionable that any military family struggles to put food on the table. And the fact that we have 16%, up to 25% of military families that experience food insecurity at some point in the previous year is unacceptable. So there's a lot of work we need to do. Having data about it is really helpful, so we have a better understanding of the problem and what the drivers are, and we can make sure that we're doing right by our military families and that the federal government really steps up.
Thank you so much, Josh. I agree with you. It's really unacceptable. Jess, you want to add on something?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I completely agree with you, Josh, and always appreciate your policy advocacy on this issue. I know you've been working on this for a long time now, and excited to see some forward movement, although certainly we want to see a little bit more. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the relationship between spouse unemployment and food insecurity. So we know that it's not that spouses don't want to work. Spouses do want to work, but are often obstructed from doing so because of some of the complications that come with military life, relocation being one of the major ones. But you also pointed out childcare. When you're paying more in childcare than you are likely to receive in pay, it just doesn't make sense to do so. So there are those complications. But what we've seen both in our research and in DoD work that has been recently published, specifically the 2021 survey of active duty spouses, is that when the spouse is unemployed, we see food insecurity go up. When spouses are employed, food insecurity goes down. So we know that those two things are connected to one another. And so within military families, we have the solution to food. We can have the solution to food insecurity by removing those barriers for spouses to be employed and increasing the financial stability of the family as a whole. But there are still some barriers in place there. So I think doing what we can to remove those obstacles and create opportunities for spouses to become employed will help address this issue in an important way.
Thank you so much, Jess. I couldn't agree more. And someone in the chat, Adrian, says, agree, Josh. There's no reason any military family should be allowed to struggle with food insecurity. That's really important. And Kimberly Kimberly acknowledges Dr. Strong and Marla. Thank you so much for engaging us in the chat. Also, if you're joining us, we're talking about the results from the recent 2022 MFLS. If you have a question, if you have something to add or a comment, please reach out to us through the comment or an email I'll provide later on in the show. We'll move to you, Marla. Jessica and Josh have shared some very interesting perspective. If I could say, I would talk for endless hours about the challenges of military spouses finding employment. Yeah. So for you as an active duty spouse, and you very much immersed personally and professionally in the fight to end food insecurity, you also reiterate at every opportunity that there's a difference between hunger and food insecurity. Please share with us more about your experience and mission.
Yes. Thank you, Lydia. And I love everything that you all are doing. Josh, especially, you have an awesome fight, and I love watching you advocate for our families. So food insecurity and hunger are two different things. So a lot of times individuals are using those terms interchangeably. However, hunger is when someone does not have food right now. Hunger is, when someone's hungry or their family's hungry, it means they have a lack of food. Food insecurity is having a lack of access to food, whether that be because of your income, whether that be because of your location, whether you're living in a food desert, or compounding issues that may lead to hunger. So food insecurity and hunger are two different things. A lot of times, again, corporations, individuals will use that term interchangeably, but there is a difference. So when we say military families are facing food insecurity, it's not that they don't have anything to eat. It's that they are facing challenges that may decrease their level of access to nutritional food options, or decrease their access to food that their families traditionally eat. So that's something that we're talking about within the military community. It is a very big problem, but like Josh alluded to, and Jess, the foundational issues are something that need to be tackled consistently and immediately. Talking about PCSing takes a toll financially on military families. Most military families will spend anywhere from $1,000 to $8,000 every time they move out of their own pockets. So, and I have personal experience in that. My family just moved to MacDill Air Force Base from Fort Drum, New York. And my family spent over $20,000 out of our own pocket because we were in a hotel for more than 90 days. And the military only paid for 10 days of that. And so my family of 5 was now, eating whatever we can, which was we were going to mobile food pantries. We were eating a lot of McDonald's, a lot of cheaper foods just to survive. And so when we're talking about those foundational issues or those compounding issues that lead to food insecurity, those are the things that need to be addressed and need to be solved. So when we're talking about PCSing childcare, a lot of childcare facilities say on installations say you have to have a job in order to get childcare. I have to have childcare in order to get a job. So how is that working for our families? Because I can't afford childcare without a job, but I can't get a job unless I already have the childcare. And so there's this cycle of this incredible cycle of, I don't know if it's misinformation or it's a lack of empathy towards military spouses, but it's a true issue within our community. And so that's one of the big things that military families struggle with is the childcare, the PCSing, but then also those compounding financial issues that come along with moving. Is if I'm using $1,000 to $8,000 every time I PCS and I'm putting that on a credit card, we're compounding interest. We're compounding other issues that now that $8,000 turned to $16,000 because of interest. And now we're paying that back. And we have these other issues that come along with health insurance and being, a family, EFM family, my family is a part of the EFMP program. And a lot of times we aren't reimbursed for travel costs unless it's over a certain amount of mileage. So all of that comes out of our pocket. There are a lot of aspects that aren't, a lot of times when we talk about food insecurity, we're talking about base pay or your wage, and we're talking about BAH. We're not talking about all the other things that collectively impact your income, like childcare, like PCSing, like toll fees in Florida that my spouse pays $200 a month just to get to work. That's not including gas or car maintenance. That's just the toll. And we're not compensated for that. And so that comes out of the check, which then can, for other families, lead to food insecurity. So definitely, I love that Josh and Mazon is tackling those foundational issues in policy that will help decrease food insecurity within our families.
Thank you so much, Marla. Thank you. In fact, we have in the chat Kimberly acknowledging you, saying thank you for the education, Marla. Thank you so much. I also took something from, the other compounding issues that you've talked about. We're coming back to you, Jessica. You had the opportunity to lead 2 well-attended deep dive sessions where you shared more about these results. I was among those attendees, and it was really, really great. There were some questions asked then, and I would like for you and the rest of us to respond to. Someone asked, what organizations does BSF, Blue Star Families, partner with on a regular basis? More specifically, I know multiple organizations that are collecting information. Does Blue Star Families compare these numbers and offer support to those organizations as it pertains to the data received to move policy forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming to the deep dive. I always appreciate having you there and asking good questions. So to answer this one, as I mentioned earlier, the Military Family Lifestyle Survey is comprehensive. It covers a whole range of different topics. And we know that we cannot be the expert on every topic all the time. So we definitely engage with other partners who are experts in their areas and can provide that subject matter expertise on particular topics. So on food insecurity, we partner with Mazon, and they help us refine questions and refine recommendations. And it is a partnership in that way. In some of our other topics, we do the same thing. For example, when we ask questions about children's education and access, and children with special educational needs or special healthcare needs, we might engage with our collaborators at Partners in Promise, or at the MIC3, or the Military Child Education Coalition. There are lots of organizations that have expertise on topics in this space that we certainly want to continue working with. So for another example is children's mental health. The National Military Family Association and MFAN have also looked at different issues that are related to these. We connect with them and say, all right, your report is saying this, our report is saying this. What is the middle ground here? Because there is an element of truth in all of them. Where I've described it before as there's a metaphor of three blind men trying to figure out what an elephant is, and everybody touches a different piece of the elephant, and they're like, one touches the trunk, is like, I think it's a snake. One touches the leg and says, I think it's a tree. And I can't remember what the other one says, but like they all have a piece of it, but together is when they can put the whole picture together and really understand what we're looking at. So that's kind of what we aim to do with the research that we do, is work in partnership with other organizations doing this work to make sure that our recommendations are situated in context, they make sense, they're talking to the right people, and we are asking questions that will help us advance that policy advocacy and continue to provide the information that policymakers need when they're making decisions about policies or programs. We want to be able to inform those decisions.
And I would just add to this, and I have to say, it's so fantastic to be part of the conversation with all of you, Marla, Jessica, Lydia. Like, the passion is just overflowing. I think the data collection that happens from groups that are trying to better understand the issue also puts pressure on the Department of Defense to. So, for example, the food insecurity issue for a long time was one where there was pushback and denial that there was a problem, and there was a lack of data that came from the Department of Defense. And so it was easier to kind of say, well, that's not really an issue. But then the Blue Star Family Survey and the MFAN survey and other things validate that, yes, there is a problem here. And in fact, the Department of Defense needs to step up and get a better handle on this. So I think not only informing the advocacy efforts and the policy solutions, but also keeping some of that pressure on the agencies to do their jobs. And they're doing that more now. So that's a good thing.
That's definitely a good thing. Definitely. Thank you so much, both of you, for the analogy. Just goes to show that for real, it's cliche, but teamwork makes the dream work, right? We have to work together. When we collaborate, there's more that we can achieve than individually. So thank you both. Josh, back to you. You understand research very well. You do it year after year. I'd like you to help us with this question out of the deep dives. Someone asked, out of curiosity, who and what determines what questions should go on the survey? Is there a group or board that comes up with the questions, and is a group or board a diverse group to include people of color? Please talk to us about what you do with, like a research food insecurity. Let's go technical.
That's technical. It's a great question, and I'm going to probably turn to Jessica and to Marla to help answer. I mean, Marla made the important distinction between hunger and food insecurity. Hunger being really the physical sensation, in food insecurity being a state where you have uncertainty, and it can certainly lead to hunger. Food insecurity really is a bureaucratic term that was developed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the survey modules that are developed by USDA really mark the rates of food insecurity. And there are different survey modules that USDA has developed. I think the most comprehensive is an 18-question survey. And you can imagine, like, 18 questions just about food security status. That's pretty comprehensive. There are different versions with fewer questions that are used in different settings. I'm actually not, I know that these surveys have been used for years and have been refined over time. I know under the Biden-Harris administration, there's been a more significant commitment to equity issues and DEI issues at an agency level. And I know that there are considerations around federal nutrition programs. I don't know for certain how much of that has gone into the survey language over time. But one thing that's helpful is to have kind of a longitudinal look at how these trends have changed. And also, interestingly, during the course of the pandemic, there were flash surveys that were done that helped to give a snapshot of different issues that our country and our communities were facing during the course of the pandemic. And as you might expect, food insecurity was something that that was significant. We all remember the stories of lines miles deep of cars waiting at a food bank that were on the nightly news. And so that flash survey data from the Census Bureau was helpful to get kind of a real-time look at these issues. One thing I want to mention too, and it's not exactly the question that you asked, but I think who asks the questions and how they're asked in a survey setting matters. And Mazone's done a lot of work around veteran food insecurity also. And one of the things we've noted is a very significant underparticipation in SNAP. And one of the reasons is because there's a lot of stigma and misunderstanding about the program and reluctance to seek help. And even when veterans are screened to be potentially food insecure, they're not necessarily connected with resources like SNAP in effective ways. So the messenger matters a lot. And there's been a growing body of research showing how peer-to-peer outreach matters significantly. So another veteran talking about how SNAP helped them and how there's nothing wrong with getting assistance from SNAP and how you can eat a healthier diet when you have a larger grocery budget, that's going to get heard better than somebody who doesn't really relate to that veteran. And so, the surveys from USDA in terms of food insecurity, I think are the most comprehensive and accurate that we have. But I think we also have to note that there's probably some variation in how the questions get asked, who asks them, and the willingness of participants to share information. And I have to think when we're talking about military families that there's probably some under self-reporting that happens because people may feel embarrassed to admit that they are having trouble putting food on the table, especially coming as an active duty military family. And so the data from USDA is important and it's not perfect. I guess that's what I'd say. And interested if Marla and Jessica have anything more to add about kind of the history of those survey questions and the bodies that come up with them.
Yeah, let me jump in there. You bring up an excellent point that the way that you ask the question, who asks the question, are incredibly important. And so when we're in the middle of our survey design process, I mean, the smallest details, do we put a comma here? Do we use the word cope versus manage? Like, it is very detail focused to make sure that what we are trying to ask is what is going to be returned, is what we're looking for is going to be returned to us. To talk a little bit more about the history of how we've asked about food insecurity and highlighting the way that we ask the question is important is back in 2015, 2016, 2017, somewhere around there, we asked about food insecurity in the Military Family Lifestyle Survey, but we asked about it in a very straightforward, has anybody in your family experienced food insecurity in the last month? And we saw very low rates because, again, as Josh pointed out, people don't want to say, A, they don't know what food insecurity really means, like define food insecurity for me. And B, they don't want to say, yes, my family is struggling when they're hardworking people who are doing all the things that they should, and therefore think they shouldn't be food insecure because we're doing the right things and we're working and so on. In 2020, can't remember what year it was, but we changed to using that USDA scale, which, again, to go back to the importance of collaborating between different partners, when everybody is using the same scale to measure it, then you have a much clearer view of what it is you're looking at. So when the DoD did a survey of service members, they used the USDA scale. When we used the USDA scale, MFAN has used it. the Survey of Active Duty Spouses has used it. And so we're all asking the same questions and defining it the same ways and getting similar responses across those different groups. That's when we have some idea. It's called triangulation. That's when we have some idea that we're on the right track here. We're aiming at the true answer. So when we start changing the questions to ask it in a less stigmatizing way and saying, are you food insecure? And we move it to, how often are these statements true for you? I didn't have enough money their adults in the household ate less or didn't eat because there wasn't enough money to buy more food, or we ran out of money to buy food at the end of the month and we had to reduce how much we were eating or how much we, eat less than we felt we should because there wasn't enough money for food. When we get to those questions that are a little bit less targeted and finger pointing and blaming, then we get maybe a truer picture of what the problem is.
Thank you so much, guys. That was quite a technical question, but you both made it so easy to understand. So thank you all for that. If you're joining us, again, we're talking about the findings from the 2022 MFLS from Blue Star Families. Thank you for joining us. You can put your comment in the chat. If you have a question or a comment, just put it in the chat. We'll be happy to answer you. We want to move on to what next, because we could talk about all these things all day, but what would we like to see? I think I'm an idealist. In my mind, I always look at the positive. I want to see what is possible as opposed to what is going on right now and how can I make it better. So that takes us to the recommendations. I think this time I want to start with Marla. What were the recommendations on housing and relocation? You've talked to us about the challenges there. Tell us about what the report said and what you think should happen.
So disclaimer, I'm super radical. And I think that PCS relocation and DLA, TLE should be fully covered. If the housing wait list is 10 days, you should receive 10 days coverage. If the housing wait list is 90 days, you should receive 90 days coverage. I think that's one of the steps in helping easing the financial burden of PCSing for military families. Another thing is like Josh said, like Jessica said, was we all need to work together to help combat this issue. And that is working with housing insecurity issues, because every place is different. Every location is different. Every cost of living is going to be different. And if we're kind of doing this blanket BAH approach and only doing 95%, then we've got to get that change. And it shouldn't really be a policy issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an easy fix. But as we know on this call, it's not. It's a fight to get BAH restored to 100%. So let's just kind of fix that, deal with that. I think that's one of the issues. As far as on the military family level, I think that we need to have those opportunities for education and also supplementation on the ground level. I love that Blue Star Families has our food insecurity events and that there are opportunities for military families to receive the commissary gift cards and the food that they literally need. So even if they're not facing hunger in this moment, they're able to use that money that they would have bought groceries with to pay a bill or to get gas. And that helps them stay away from facing food insecurity. So those are my recommendations. Advocacy, Josh is doing that. Maison, Blue Star Families, Infant, everyone is doing advocacy. Everyone is doing, providing and supplementing, but we've got to get our leaders, our military leaders and our congressional leaders on board to make these impactful changes that will be sustainable for the future.
You're right, Marla. Thank you so much. I want to include I think I saw something on the chat. Yeah, Laura is saying very true. Transparent questions make the difference in response. Can we have Jessica? Jessica wants to jump in on something that Marla said. Yes.
Thank you. Marla, you are 100% right on relocation expenses and out-of-pocket expenses. One of the things that Blue Star Families did last year is a real quick pulse, what we call as a pulse check. We wanted to see how much are families spending out of pocket? Just like you said, how many days are you in temporary housing while you're waiting for either your military housing to open up, or you waiting for your civilian housing to be available, or find something that will work in your budget that meets all of your criteria. And that is partially inspired. I had a similar experience to you, Marla, in moving to a new duty station and being in air. I couldn't do a hotel. I can't do a hotel with 3 kids and pets and months on end and working from home. That was not going to happen. So I could either pay for another hotel room out of pocket, or what we ended up doing was Airbnbs. And we were in Airbnbs for 3 months waiting for our housing to open up. And again, as you mentioned, at that time, the reimbursement rate or the number of days you were reimbursed for was 10 days. It's since expanded to 14 days and up to 60 days for some certain circumstances. So I think, it's important to note how impactful relocation costs are on food insecurity and financial budgets as a whole, recognizing that when you're relocating, more often than not, the spouse is also losing their job at the same time. So we have a decreased income and an increased expenses at the same time. And we don't know how long that'll be, because part of that is because of the housing market as it exists right now. And I know in the Tampa area, it's craziness. It's skyrocketed more maybe than other parts of the country. So relocation costs, out-of-pocket costs, are an important piece of that. But I think it's also important to recognize what has been done and what has changed since then. On the day we closed that pulse check on relocation, Secretary of Defense Austin issued a memo that said, we're changing TLE, we're increasing it. We're changing a bunch of other things that will help address some of these issues. So that report includes obviously all of the information before those policy changes were made. So we don't yet know what the impact of those policy changes are. So he issued this memo back in September, and then issued another one just a few weeks ago in late March, addressing some of these other things like access to childcare, improving spouse employment. We don't know yet how impactful and how helpful those policies will be, but they're steps in the right direction. And we have to continue the advocacy and the monitoring to see, is this enough, or is there more work that needs to be done?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. I believe Josh wants to chime in.
Sure. So Marla, I'm right there with you in being radical, but you know what? Like, what we're talking about isn't radical, and it shouldn't be radical at all. We're talking about making sure that military families have what they need. That should be common sense. There's nothing radical about that. The fact that we have to push so hard to get congressional leaders and to get administration leadership to pay attention to these issues and make changes, that's radical, not in a good way, and that's on them. What we're calling for is just common sense. So I'm going to talk about a couple of pieces of legislation that would make a meaningful difference on the food insecurity issue. But before I do that, I think there's a cultural shift that we need to make. You know, we talked a little bit about the stigma and the reluctance to seek help. And part of that is informed because there are such negative cultural connotations around programs like SNAP, and there shouldn't be. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, is the most effective anti-hunger program we have as a country. And yet we have elected officials and media pundits who make allegations about people who are dependent on this. And they talk about it as a welfare program that evokes the welfare queen mythology of the 1980s that, by the way, is very racially coded and judgmental. So rather than try and knock people down and prevent them from getting the help that they need, we should be working to lift people up and ensure that everybody has a minimum standard. Right now, as we speak, congressional leaders are talking about a proposal that would make significant cuts to federal programs to deal with deficit reductions and in order to raise the debt ceiling, which normally is just done as routine business. But this means cuts to SNAP. And part of that is because there's not enough consideration given to low-income Americans. So I think we need a cultural shift. And I think we need to, Mazon often uses this lens to think about our work, that we work to transform things from the way they are to the way that they should be. It's kind of I think, sort of a Jewish framing about this. And so that's the urgency of what we need to do. And it shouldn't be radical again. So for people watching, there are a few pieces of legislation that have already been introduced that go and check to see if your member of Congress, if your senators have already supported. So on the Senate side, Senators Duckworth and Murkowski reintroduced the Military Family Nutrition Access Act. That's Senate Bill 487. That would essentially remove the barrier to SNAP access for military families by excluding the basic allowance for housing as counted income. We've known for years that this was a problem that prevented junior enlisted families in some senior enlisted and even some officer households from qualifying for SNAP because their BAH got treated as income. A counterpart to that on the House side that Congressman Jimmy Panetta has introduced with Kathy McMorris Rodgers is HR 1763. Again, the Military Family Nutrition Act. And then additionally, there's an effort in the National Defense Authorization Act to make needed corrections to the Basic Needs Allowance. The Military Family Basic Needs Allowance was something that Mazon worked with together with National Military Family Association, Military Officers Association, and others. This is Bill HR 1764 by Congressman Panetta. They would adjust the Basic Needs Allowance because in its current form, it's compromised. It doesn't fully exclude the basic allowance for housing, and some of the regulations that the Department of Defense included in its implementation are very narrow and limiting. So the program doesn't work effectively. We want to make sure that it works as well as possible to reach all military families in need. So I think there are things that people watching can do to reach out to your members of Congress, make sure that they're supporting these bills. They're really common sense. They're not radical at all. It's been more difficult than it should be to get them over the finish line, but we're getting much closer.
Wow. Thank you so much. The other perspective of we have to consider what's going on as well and all the efforts being done in the space as well. So thank you for that perspective, Jess and Josh. I'm about to shrub because SH and then S by itself. You guys are confusing me, but it's okay. We've covered the recommendations pretty well, unless Jess, you want to share something because yours was about recommendations for spouse unemployment and financial security. Do you want to say something about that before we move? We finish?
Yeah, let me jump in there. I think as we have all been talking, that these food insecurity is not. It's an issue in and of itself, but it's also a symptom of larger issues, financial security, which is impacted by housing costs, relocation costs, spouse employment, childcare. All of those things are related to one another. So if we want to address food insecurity, there are some ways to do it directly through things like the basic needs allowance that Josh talked about, but there are lots and lots of ways to do it indirectly through these other contributing factors. Like you had asked for me to pick like a spouse employment recommendation. And I just looked at our spouse employment finding and there's like 20 just on that alone, much less all the other things that can impact financial security. So there are lots of ways. And I think addressing spouse employment and childcare are two of the main levers by which we can make some change and impact this issue that continues to persist. So lots to do there, but employers can help retain spouses through remote work, through a PCS. That is one big one that has the potential to really be a game changer for military families. Like, speaking again from my personal experience, if I were not remotely employed and if I could not have brought my job with me, we would not be at this duty station because there aren't jobs available to me here in the same way. And so we would have been geobadging. And I know many military families make the same choices about if you're deciding on which duty station you're going to go to next, the spouse is thinking about what are the employment opportunities for me there? What if you could remove that consideration from the algorithm? What if you could just go wherever your service member's military service takes you and keep your job with you? And I think that has the potential to be a game changer for many spouses, but there are many spouses for which that just doesn't fit. You can't be a beautician or a hairstylist. You can't do that remotely. That's not That's not likely. You can teach remotely, but you can't be a teacher in a school remotely in the same way. So it doesn't work. You can't be a nurse remotely. So it doesn't work for all professions, but for some professions, for some positions, that can be a really key solution to some of these problems.
Yeah, I think that to piggyback off Jess, like we saw during the pandemic that the capabilities of remote work and the flexible work environment are like astounding, right? Jobs that people were going in 9 to 5 could be done at home successfully. And so that shouldn't be an inhibitor for, a prohibitor for military spouses to seek employment. Childcare, that's another, I feel like an easy fix. Provide childcare vouchers for military families who aren't either able to get into the CDC or this limited time voucher, until that spouse is employed. Do something to help just kind of bridge that gap from duty station to duty station. And to go further into that, a lot of branches, the different branches do things differently. So my family, we're an active duty Army family. We are now stationed at MacDill Air Force Base for the first time. There are things as an Army family that I didn't qualify for. Whereas, on an Air Force base, which was childcare being one of them, you can get childcare through the CDC, but there was a program that allowed you to get a certain number of free childcare hours upon PCSing that I didn't qualify for as an Army family. We didn't qualify for that. And it's like, that's a really cool program. I wish we could use it, and but we couldn't. And so that was really significant for us. But I think that if we just come together and we're already doing it, the policy, the advocacy efforts, the supplementation. If we do all of these things consistently, we could solve food insecurity within the military community.
Thank you so much. This has been so amazing, so wonderful. I mean, all of you just, have everything at your fingertips and very easy to share. Thank you so much for doing that. I saw something in the chat. Laura is saying, thank you, Josh, for addressing the historic stigmas about receiving SNAP. Cultural change is indeed necessary. She agrees with you. Thank you so much, Laura, for that comment. As I said before, if you have anything to share with us or a question to ask, you can send it to research@bluestarfamilies.org. My apologies. research@bluestarfamilies.org, or you can put it in the chat. Even better, I have included the research in the chat. I have included our panelists' profiles in the chat as well. I have included the resources that we provide as Blue Star Families on the chat. So please head on to bluestarfamilies.org and get a lot more than we have shared today. I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank you, Josh. I want to thank you, Jessica. I want to thank you, Marla, for taking your time and being so committed to this community and wanting to make a difference. Thank you so much. Just to let you know, my fellowship is also coming to an end, and so is Marla's. So there's only one more Money Mondays I'll be doing. I'll be hosting the last Money Mondays next month. Join me on May 5th. We'll be discussing wealth creation or generational wealth. You don't want to just come and leave nothing behind. Now, come learn with us how to build wealth through a lot of things: insurance, funds, and you have to also start teaching your kids early enough to ensure that this wealth that you're building stays for generation. I promise you that will be great. Don't miss that. So thank you again from Blue Star Families. Thank you so much, the panelists as well. Have a great day. And as always, if not you, who is going to do it? And if not now, when are we going to do it? Have a good one. Bye-bye.